Hi, my name's Victoria. And the night my parents announced they were handing our family's construction empire to my twin brother Marcus, my grandmother smiled like she'd been holding her breath for 20 years. My father stood behind his mahogany desk, arms crossed, like he was delivering a military briefing instead of destroying my life. I was still wearing my army dress blues from the ceremony that afternoon, the same uniform I'd worn when they pinned the bronze star to my chest. 6 months earlier. Marcus didn't even look at me. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was the manila envelope sitting on the coffee table with my name on it, and how eager they all seemed for me to open it. They didn't break me that night, but they came damn close. Before we dive deeper, I want you to think about something. Have you ever trusted someone so completely that when they betrayed you, it felt like losing a limb? Because what I'm about to tell you might sound impossible, but every word happened exactly as I'm telling it. My own family spent 2 decades setting up the perfect con, and my twin brother smiled while they did it. Let's begin. I stood frozen in the doorway of my father's home office, the same room where he'd taught me to read blueprints when I was 7, where we'd planned the expansion of Romano Construction into 3 states, where he'd promised me that someday all of this would be mine because I was the one with the vision, the drive, the business sense that Marcus had never shown. The bronze star felt heavy against my chest, not from its physical weight, but from the irony of receiving recognition for valor on the same day my family would strip away everything I'd worked for. My father, Thomas Romano, cleared his throat, like he was calling a board meeting to order. His silver hair was perfectly styled, his Italian leather shoes polished to a mirror shine. Behind him, the wall displayed 3 generations of Romano construction projects. Hotels, shopping centers, residential developments that had built our family's fortune from a small concrete business my grandfather started with borrowed tools in 1952. "Victoria," he began, not meeting my eyes, "your service to our country has been admirable. But running a multi-million-dollar construction company requires someone who's been here, day in and day out, learning the business from the ground up." Marcus finally looked at me then, and I saw something I'd never noticed before. Satisfaction. Cold, calculated satisfaction. He was wearing a charcoal suit that cost more than most people's monthly salary, his dark hair styled in that effortless way that actually takes an hour with professional products. We were identical in some ways, twins born 4 minutes apart. But where I'd spent the last 8 years in combat zones and military bases, he'd spent them in country clubs and networking events. "I've been here," I said quietly, my voice steady despite the earthquake happening in my chest. "Every summer break, every holiday leave, every weekend pass I could get. I've been learning this business since I could walk." My grandmother, Nonna Rosa, spoke from her leather armchair in the corner. At 83, she still commanded attention when she entered a room, still wore her silver hair in an elegant chignon, still carried herself like the Italian matriarch who'd helped build this empire alongside my grandfather. "Bella mia," she said, using the pet name she'd called me since childhood. "Construction is a man's world. You've done enough, more than enough." The words hit like shrapnel. Nonna Rosa, who had taught me to calculate square footage in my head, who had shown me how to spot shoddy workmanship from 50 yards away, who had told me stories about working alongside Nonna when women weren't supposed to touch anything harder than a dinner plate. She was looking at me now like I was a stranger, like the granddaughter who'd spent countless hours at construction sites with her had been replaced by someone she didn't recognize. "Marcus has been preparing for this transition," my father continued, pulling out a thick leather portfolio. "The board voted unanimously. Effective immediately, he'll be taking over as CEO of Romano Construction. You'll receive a generous severance package, of course, and we'll provide excellent references for whatever career path you choose to pursue." Severance package. Like I was an employee being laid off instead of the daughter who'd bled for this company. I thought about the nights I'd spent reviewing contracts via email from Forward Operating Base Shank in Afghanistan, the video calls. I'd taken in a plywood communications tent while mortars fell in the distance, helping solve problems with the Memphis project timeline. I thought about the Bronze Star ceremony that afternoon, where my commanding officer had praised my leadership under fire, my ability to make critical decisions when lives depended on it. What about the Nashville expansion? I asked. My military training keeping my voice level. The land acquisition I've been working on for 3 years, the permits I secured, the investor meetings I took via satellite phone from Kandahar. Marcus leaned back in his chair, fingers steepled like he was about to deliver a lecture. That project was always too ambitious, too risky. We're focusing on smaller, more manageable developments, steady growth instead of your aggressive expansion ideas. Aggressive. The word tasted bitter. Every successful project we'd completed in the last 5 years had started with my aggressive ideas. The luxury high-rise in downtown Nashville that was now 90% occupied. The mixed-use development in Franklin that had won 3 architectural awards. The affordable housing project in Murfreesboro that had been featured in Construction Today magazine. I looked around the room at the faces I'd trusted my entire life. My father, who'd taught me that Romano women were just as capable as Romano men. My grandmother, who'd bragged to her church friends about her granddaughter, the war hero and future business owner. Marcus, who'd called me from college asking for help with basic math because he couldn't figure out material costs for his construction management classes. I need some air, I said, turning toward the door. Victoria, my father called after me. Don't forget the envelope. I stopped, my hand on the brass doorknob that had been installed when the house was built in 1987, the year Marcus and I were born. The envelope sat on the coffee table like evidence in a court case. Heavy cream paper, my name written in my father's precise handwriting. Inside, I knew, would be legal documents, contracts, non-compete agreements, papers that would make this betrayal official. I'll look at it later, I said without turning around. It's important that you review it tonight, Nona Rosa said, her voice carrying that tone of authority I'd heard her use with subcontractors and city planners. There are time-sensitive matters that require your signature. Time-sensitive. Everything was always time-sensitive when they wanted something from me, when I was coordinating supply deliveries while dodging IEDs, when I was negotiating with local contractors via broken cell phone connections, when I was solving problems that Marcus couldn't handle from his climate-controlled office. But when I needed time to process what they'd just done to me, when I needed a moment to understand how 26 years of family loyalty had evaporated in a 15-minute meeting, suddenly patience was a luxury they couldn't afford. I picked up the envelope, feeling its weight. Whatever was inside would change everything. I could sense it in the way they all watched me, in the way Marcus's jaw tightened slightly, in the way my father's fingers drummed against his desk the way they did when he was nervous about a big presentation. Fine, I said, tucking the envelope under my arm. I'll read it tonight. As I walked toward the door, I heard Marcus clear his throat. Victoria, he said, and for a moment, his voice carried an echo of the brother who used to build blanket forts with me, who used to share his Halloween candy, who used to tell me I was braver than any boy in our class. I turned back, hoping for something, an apology, an acknowledgement of what this meant, a sign that somewhere underneath the expensive suit and practiced indifference, my twin brother still existed. Instead, he said, "Thank you for your service." The words were delivered with the same hollow courtesy you'd show a stranger at a veterans ceremony, polite, respectful, completely empty. I walked out of that office knowing that the family I'd fought for, literally and figuratively, had never really existed at all. I drove through Nashville's downtown core in complete silence, my dress blues still pristine despite feeling like I'd been through combat all over again. The Bronze Star caught the streetlight every time I passed under an overpass, a cruel reminder of the honor I'd received just hours before my own family dishonored everything I'd believed about loyalty and sacrifice. My hands gripped the steering wheel tighter than necessary. Muscle memory from convoy driving in Afghanistan, where relaxed hands could mean the difference between life and death. Where are you right now as you're hearing this? Are you driving home from work, wondering if the people you trust most would ever blindside you like this? Are you lying in bed, thinking about family dynamics that never quite made sense? Because I need you to understand something before we go deeper into this story. What happened in that office wasn't just about a family business. It was about 26 years of careful manipulation, 26 years of making me believe I belonged somewhere I was always meant to be expendable. The envelope sat on my passenger seat like an unexploded ordnance. In the Army, we had protocols for dealing with suspicious packages, careful procedures designed to minimize damage when something inevitably detonated. But there's no training manual for handling the moment your family hands you a document that will redefine your entire existence. I'd defused actual bombs in Kandahar province, yet this manila envelope felt more dangerous than anything I'd encountered in 2 combat deployments. I pulled into the parking lot of Centennial Park, the same place where Marcus and I used to feed ducks as children, where Nona Rosa would bring us on Sunday afternoons after church and tell us stories about the old country while we threw breadcrumbs into the pond. The irony wasn't lost on me that I was seeking comfort in a place that now represented everything I'd apparently misunderstood about my childhood. My phone buzzed against the dashboard. A text from my Army buddy, Jessica Martinez, who'd been at the Bronze Star ceremony that afternoon. "Still can't believe you're finally home for good. Drinks tomorrow to celebrate your heroic return to civilian life?" Civilian life. Jessica had no idea that civilian life had just ambushed me harder than any Taliban insurgent ever had. I typed back, "Rain check. Family stuff." It felt like the understatement of the century. Another buzz. This time from Marcus. "Hope you understand this is what's best for everyone. Family dinner Sunday?" The audacity was breathtaking. He'd just stolen my birthright and was now inviting me to pass the pasta like nothing had happened. I stared at the message until the screen went dark, then set the phone face down on the seat beside the envelope. The park was nearly empty at 8:30 on a Tuesday evening. A few joggers traced the perimeter paths, their rhythmic footsteps reminding me of morning PT runs at Fort Campbell. I'd been so eager to return home, so ready to trade my combat boots for steel-toed work boots, my military-issue gear for hard hats and safety vests. The Romano Construction logo was tattooed on my heart the same way the Army had marked my soul. I thought about calling my old platoon leader, Major Sarah Chen, who'd mentored me through 2 deployments and taught me that leadership meant making hard decisions when everyone else was paralyzed by fear. Sarah would know what to do. She'd probably tell me to approach this like a tactical problem, gather intelligence, assess the terrain, identify the enemy's weaknesses before making any moves. But this wasn't Afghanistan. This was family. And family was supposed to be the safe place you returned to after war. I finally opened the envelope with the same careful precision I'd used to open care packages from home, when each letter and cookie felt like a lifeline to the world I was fighting to get back to. Inside were 3 documents, each more devastating than the last. The first was a non-compete agreement, preventing me from working in construction within a 100-mile radius of Nashville for 5 years. My father's signature was already notarized, at the bottom, along with spaces for mine. The second was a severance package worth exactly $200,000, paid out over 24 months, contingent on my signature on the non-compete. The third document made my blood freeze. It was a psychological evaluation, dated 6 months ago, signed by Dr. Richard Brennan, a psychiatrist I'd never met. The document claimed I'd been suffering from severe PTSD, making me unsuitable for high-stress executive decision-making and potentially dangerous in situations requiring complex judgment. According to Dr. Brennan's professional assessment, my military service had left me emotionally volatile and incapable of the rational thinking required for corporate leadership. I read the document 3 times, each word feeling like a slap across the face. Not only had they decided I wasn't worthy of the family business, they'd created an elaborate lie about my mental health to justify their decision. The evaluation referenced conversations and incidents that had never happened, described symptoms I'd never exhibited, painted a picture of a broken veteran who couldn't be trusted with anything more complicated than a desk job. The date on the EE evaluation was particularly telling. 6 months ago, I'd been in my final deployment, leading a construction engineering unit that had rebuilt 3 schools and 2 medical clinics in Helmand Province. My commanding officer had specifically commended my exceptional judgment under pressure and remarkable emotional stability in high-stress situations. Yet somehow, Dr. Brennan had conducted a thorough psychological assessment without ever meeting me, examining me, or speaking to anyone who'd actually served with me. My phone rang, startling me back to the present. The caller ID showed Dad Mobile. I stared at the screen until it went to voicemail, then immediately played the message back. Victoria, I know this is difficult, but you need to understand that we're protecting you as much as we're protecting the company. The construction industry is brutal, sweetheart. The stress, the competition, the long hours. After everything you've been through overseas, you deserve peace. You deserve a chance to heal. Call me back when you've had time to think about this rationally. Protecting me. Like I was a fragile bird with broken wings instead of a decorated combat veteran who'd earned a Bronze Star for pulling 3 wounded soldiers out of a collapsed building under enemy fire. Like I was a victim instead of someone who'd chosen to serve her country, while my brother chose to serve himself. I thought about the Bronze Star ceremony that afternoon. How proud I'd felt when Colonel Morrison had spoken about courage under fire, about making impossible decisions when failure meant people died. I thought about the letter that came with the medal, signed by a general I'd never met, thanking me for embodying the values that made America strong. Then I thought about my father's voice on that voicemail, the way he'd called me sweetheart. Like I was still 7 years old, like 8 years of military service and 2 combat deployments had somehow made me less capable instead of more. The way he'd suggested I needed to heal from the very experiences that had forged me into someone strong enough to lead soldiers through the worst situations imaginable. A jogger passed by my car, earbuds in, completely absorbed in her evening. Run. She looked peaceful, focused, like someone whose biggest decision was whether to take the long route or the short route home. I envied her simplicity, her uncomplicated relationship with the people she'd trusted since birth. I pulled out my phone and scrolled through my contacts until I found Dr. Amanda Foster, the Army psychologist who'd conducted my actual fitness for duty evaluation before my discharge. We'd talked extensively about transition challenges, about the difficulties of returning to civilian life, about the importance of finding purpose beyond military service. Dr. Foster had been the one to tell me I was psychologically sound, professionally, ready, and personally prepared for whatever came next. Her number went straight to voicemail. Dr. Foster, this is Victoria Romano. I know it's late, but I need to ask you about something urgent. Could you call me back when you get this? Thank you. I sat in that parking lot for another hour, watching the last joggers complete their routes, watching the park lights flicker on one by one, watching Nashville settle into another ordinary evening while my world rearranged itself into something unrecognizable. The documents in my lap felt radioactive, too dangerous to touch but too important to ignore. Finally, I started the engine and drove home to my apartment, the same one-bedroom place I'd kept throughout my military service, the one that had always felt temporary because I'd assumed I'd eventually move into the family compound, take my place in the business that bore our name. Tonight, for the first time in 8 years, it felt permanent. My apartment felt smaller than I remembered, like it had shrunk during the months I'd been deployed. The same IKEA furniture I'd bought as a young lieutenant still filled the living room. practical pieces chosen for their ability to survive multiple military moves. On the kitchen table sat a stack of mail my neighbor had collected, bills and advertisements mixed with thank you letters from the families of soldiers I'd served with overseas. The contrast between those heartfelt notes and the documents I'd just read felt like whiplash. I set the Bronze Star ceremony program on the counter next to a photo from my college graduation, the one where Marcus and I stood on either side of our parents, both of us wearing caps and gowns, both of us grinning like we owned the world. I was holding my business degree, the one I'd earned magna cum laude while Marcus had barely scraped by with a C average in construction management. In the photo, my father's arm was around my shoulders, and he was looking at me with what I'd interpreted as pride, but now recognized as something else entirely. The landline rang, an old-fashioned sound that seemed out of place in my sparse apartment. I'd kept the landline specifically for family calls, a reliable connection that couldn't be dropped by poor cell service or technical difficulties. Now I wished I'd canceled it years ago. Victoria? Nona Rosa's voice carried that familiar mix of authority and affection that had shaped my childhood. I wanted to make sure you made it home safely. I'm fine, Nona. The words came out flatter than I intended. Good, good. Listen, Bella Mia, I know tonight was difficult. Change is always difficult. But you must understand, this decision wasn't made lightly. We've been discussing it for months, weighing all the options. Months. While I was leading engineering missions in Afghanistan, while I was video calling into board meetings from military bases, while I was counting down days until I could come home and take my rightful place in the family business, they'd been conducting secret meetings about my future without me. Why didn't anyone think to include me in these discussions? I asked, sinking into my second-hand couch. Because you were serving your country, dear. We didn't want to burden you with business concerns while you had more important things to focus on. More important things. As if the family company I'd been groomed to inherit since childhood was somehow less important than the missions I was completing overseas. As if my ability to lead soldiers through combat zones somehow disqualified me from leading construction crews through building projects. Nona, what was the name of that psychiatrist? Dr. Brennan? There was a pause, the kind of silence that fills with unspoken truths. I'm not sure I know what you mean, Victoria. The psychological evaluation in the envelope. Dr. Richard Brennan. Where did you find him? Another pause. Your father handled those arrangements. Medical matters are his area of expertise. Medical matters. My father was a construction contractor, not a doctor. His area of expertise was concrete and steel, not psychological evaluations and fitness assessments. But Nona Rosa was deflecting like a seasoned politician, which should have been my first clue that this conversation was scripted. I should let you get some rest, she continued. Tomorrow will be a busy day, lots of paperwork to handle, transitions to manage. Marcus will need time to settle into his new role. What about my role, Nona? What exactly am I supposed to do now? You're young, Bella. You have options. Maybe you could use your military experience, work for a security company, or go back to school. Get a nice office job somewhere, something less stressful than construction. Security company. Office job. Like I was a problem to be solved rather than a Romano to be honored. I thought about my great-grandfather, Antonio Romano, who'd started this company with nothing but a strong back and an unshakable belief that hard work could build anything. Nona Rosa used to tell me stories about how he'd included his daughters in the business discussions, how he'd believed that Romano blood meant Romano rights, regardless of gender. Apparently, that philosophy had died with him. After we hung up, I walked through my apartment, really looking at it for the first time in months. The walls were bare except for my military awards and a few family photos. No art, no personal touches, nothing that suggested someone actually lived here rather than just sleeping between deployments. I'd always justified the sparse decorating by telling myself this was temporary housing, that I'd invest in real furniture and meaningful possessions once I moved into the family compound and took over the business. Now this sterile apartment was my permanent address, and the family compound was Marcus's domain. I opened my laptop and searched for Dr. Richard Brennan in Nashville. His website featured a professional headshot of a middle-aged man with kind eyes and silver hair, specializing in trauma therapy and corporate consulting. His credentials were impressive. PhD in psychology from Vanderbilt, 20 years of clinical experience, expert witness testimony in legal proceedings. Under his services section, I found something interesting: fitness for duty evaluations and executive assessment services. The pieces started fitting together like puzzle segments I'd been carrying without realizing it. Dr. Brennan wasn't just a therapist. He was the kind of psychologist companies hired to evaluate employees, to provide professional opinions about mental health and job performance, to create documentation that could justify personnel decisions. I scrolled through his testimonials, reading quotes from satisfied corporate clients who'd used his services to make difficult but necessary staffing changes and ensure executive positions were filled by the most psychologically suitable candidates. One testimonial particularly caught my attention. Dr. Brennan's thorough evaluation process helped our family business navigate a complex succession issue with complete professional confidence. Family business, succession issue, professional confidence. My phone buzzed with a text from Marcus. "Talked to Nona. She's worried about you. Maybe we should grab breakfast tomorrow, just the two of us. Like old times. Like old times. When we were kids, Marcus and I had a Saturday morning tradition of meeting at Mickey's Diner for pancakes and chocolate milk before spending the day at whatever construction site Dad was supervising. We'd wear matching hard hats that were too big for our heads and pretend to inspect the work like junior supervisors. Those breakfasts had been some of my favorite childhood memories, just me and my twin brother planning our shared future in the family business. Now he wanted to grab breakfast the day after stealing that future from me. I walked to my bedroom and opened the closet where I'd stored my army dress uniform and dress blues. Behind them hung the few civilian professional clothes I owned, outfits I'd bought for video conference calls and the occasional business dinner when I was home on leave. Everything was functional rather than fashionable, practical rather than polished. I'd always figured I'd upgrade my wardrobe once I started drawing a real salary from Romano Construction. On the top shelf sat a shoebox I hadn't opened in years. Inside were mementos from childhood, report cards, science fair ribbons, the key to the first truck Dad had let me drive around construction sites when I was 13. At the bottom of the box was a letter I'd written to myself in 8th grade, part of a school assignment about future goals. "Dear future Victoria," it began in my careful 13-year-old handwriting. "I hope you're running Romano Construction by now and building amazing things that make people happy. I hope you're making Nono proud in heaven and showing everyone that Romano girls are just as good as Romano boys. I hope you never forgot that you wanted to build a whole city someday." I held that letter for a long time, remembering the girl who'd written it. She'd been so confident, so certain about her place in the world, so sure that hard work and family loyalty would be enough to secure her future. She'd never imagined that the people she trusted most would spend decades planning her elimination. The girl who'd written that letter deserved better than what had happened tonight. She deserved the truth about why her family had really pushed her out, and she deserved to know what they'd been hiding from her all these years. I grabbed my laptop and started researching Romano Construction's recent projects, financial reports, and business filings. If they thought 8 years of military intelligence training had made me less capable of corporate analysis, they were about to learn exactly how wrong they were. The first thing I discovered was that the Nashville expansion project I'd been coordinating wasn't just ambitious. It was absolutely critical to the company's survival. Romano Construction was carrying more debt than I'd realized, and the Nashville project represented their only viable path to financial stability. The second thing I discovered was that Marcus had made 3 major mistakes in the 6 months since I'd been overseas. Mistakes that had cost the company nearly $500,000 in penalties and delays. The third thing I discovered changed everything. The third discovery hit me like incoming artillery fire. According to the Davidson County property records, Romano Construction didn't actually own the land where their headquarters sat. The same building that housed our main offices, equipment storage, and the conference room where I'd just been fired from my own family legacy. The property was listed under a different owner entirely. Romano Family Trust, established in 1987 and managed by a single trustee. Victoria Elena Romano. Me. I stared at the computer screen until my eyes burned, reading the same legal document over and over again. The trust had been established the year Marcus and I were born, funded by my grandfather before his death in 1989. According to the paperwork, ownership would transfer to the designated beneficiary upon their 25th birthday or completion of military service, whichever came later. I'd turned 26 8 months ago. I'd completed my military service this afternoon, which meant that as of today, I owned the land beneath Romano Construction's empire. My hands shook as I scrolled through more property records. The trust didn't just own the headquarters. It owned the equipment yard in Antioch where we stored millions of dollars worth of heavy machinery. It owned the warehouse in Murfreesboro where we kept building supplies. It owned 3 of the most valuable commercial lots in Nashville, including the one Marcus had just bragged about developing into manageable projects. I grabbed my phone and dialed my grandfather's old lawyer, Frank Castellano, the man who'd handled our family's legal affairs for 40 years. His answering service picked up after 6 rings. "This is Victoria Romano. I need to speak with Mr. Castellano first thing tomorrow morning. It's urgent." Then I called Jessica Martinez, the only person I trusted completely right now. "Vic? What's wrong? You sound like you're about to assault someone." "Jess, I need you to come over and bring that bottle of whiskey you've been saving for a celebration. We need to talk. On my way." While I waited for Jessica, I kept digging through public records, discovering layer after layer of information that my family had apparently hoped I'd never find. The Romano Family Trust was more complex than the simple land ownership I'd initially discovered. It also held mineral rights, water rights, and development permits that were absolutely essential for any construction work in Davidson County. More importantly, the trust included a clause that I'd never heard mentioned in any family discussion. If Romano Construction ever ceased to be majority-owned by a direct descendant of Antonio Romano, all trust properties would be sold and the proceeds donated to veterans organizations. My grandfather had been a veteran himself, a Navy Seabee who'd served in the Pacific during World War II. He'd apparently built this protection into the trust specifically to ensure that the family business remained in family hands, not corporate hands or outside investors. What he probably hadn't anticipated was that his own family would try to push out the veteran descendant who'd been designated as the trust's beneficiary. Jessica arrived 20 minutes later with a bottle of Jameson and a bag of Chinese takeout. She took one look at my face and poured 2 generous glasses of whiskey without asking any questions. "Okay," she said, settling into my second-hand armchair in her off-duty jeans and army t-shirt. "Talk to me. What happened after the ceremony?" I told her everything. The family meeting, the fake psychological evaluation, the non-compete agreement, the discovery about the trust. Jessica listened without interrupting, her expression growing darker with each revelation. "Those bastards," she said when I finished. "That's not just betrayal, Vic. That's fraud. Criminal fraud." "I know." I took a sip of whiskey, feeling the burn all the way down. "But they're still my family. Family doesn't do this to family." Jessica leaned forward, her voice taking on the same intensity she'd used when leading tactical briefings in Afghanistan. "Think about it strategically. They've been planning this for months, maybe years. They waited until you were overseas and couldn't defend yourself. They created fake medical documentation to justify their decision. They tried to lock you into a non-compete that would prevent you from starting your own company. She was right, of course. In the military, we'd have called this a coordinated assault, multiple vectors of attack designed to overwhelm the target's defenses. But recognizing the tactics didn't make the emotional impact any less devastating. "There's something else," I said, pulling up the property records on my laptop. "Look at this." Jessica studied the screen, her eyebrows rising higher with each document. "Holy shit, Vic. You don't just own the land. You own their entire operation." "I know. Do they know you know?" "I don't think so. The way my father was, pushing me to sign those documents tonight, the way Nonna Rosa was talking about transitions and paperwork. I think they're counting on me being too emotional to think clearly." Jessica stood up and started pacing, the way she always did when she was working through a complex problem. "We need to be smart about this. You've got leverage they don't know. You have, but you need to use it strategically. I'm not looking for revenge, Jess. I'm not talking about revenge. I'm talking about justice." She stopped pacing and looked at me directly. "You earned your place in that company. You've got the education, the experience, the leadership skills, and now we know you've got the legal ownership of their most valuable assets. They tried to push you out based on lies and manipulation. I thought about my great-grandfather Antonio, who'd built this company from nothing, who'd believed that hard work and integrity were the foundations of lasting success. I thought about my grandfather, who'd set up the trust to protect the family legacy and ensure it stayed in deserving hands. I thought about all the soldiers I'd led through impossible situations, who'd trusted me to make the right decisions when everything was falling apart." "What would you do?" I asked. "I'd remind them that they raised a warrior, not a victim," Jessica said. "And I'd make sure they understood exactly what that means." We spent the next 2 hours going through every document I could find, building a timeline of my family's deception and mapping out my legal position. By midnight, we had a clear picture of the situation. Romano Construction was heavily leveraged and dependent on properties they didn't actually own. Marcus had been making costly mistakes that threatened the company's financial stability. The Nashville expansion project I'd been coordinating was their only viable path to profitability, and it required permits and development rights that were controlled by my trust. Most importantly, my family had systematically excluded me from business decisions while I was serving overseas, then used my absence as justification for denying me leadership roles. They'd violated both the spirit and the letter of my grandfather's trust agreement. "One more thing," Jessica said as she was getting ready to leave. "That psychological evaluation? I know Dr. Brennan. He did some consulting work for the Army a few years ago. He's legitimate, but he's also expensive. Someone paid him a lot of money to write that assessment without ever meeting you. How much money? Enough to make it worth risking his professional reputation. I'd guess somewhere in the 5-figure range." After Jessica left, I sat in my living room with the whiskey and the property documents, trying to process the magnitude of what I'd discovered. My family hadn't just betrayed me tonight. They'd been systematically planning my exclusion for months, spending significant money to build a legal case against my competence, all while counting on my loyalty and trust to keep me from investigating their motives. Tomorrow morning, I would call Frank Castellano and start the process of claiming my rightful ownership of the Romano family trust properties. Tomorrow afternoon, I would review every contract and business deal Marcus had negotiated in my absence. Tomorrow evening, I would decide exactly how to use the leverage I'd just discovered. Tonight, I would honor the grandfather I'd never met by reading his trust documents one more time, understanding the vision he'd had for his family's future, and preparing to fulfill the responsibility he'd placed in my hands. The girl who'd written that letter in 8th grade about building a whole city someday was about to get her chance. She just hadn't expected to have to fight her own family for it. Frank Castellano's office hadn't changed since I was a child visiting with my grandfather. The same dark wood paneling lined the walls, The same leather-bound law books filled floor-to-ceiling shelves, and the same ornate brass desk lamp cast warm light across documents that would reshape my understanding of everything I thought I knew about my family. Frank himself had aged considerably, his thick Italian accent still strong at 78, his eyes still sharp behind wire-rimmed glasses that had probably been fashionable in 1985. "Victoria, cara mia," he said, rising from his chair with the careful movements of a man who'd spent decades hunched over legal documents. "I wondered when you would come to see me. Your grandfather, he would be so proud of the woman you have become." I set the trust documents on his desk, along with printouts of the property records I'd discovered the night before. "Frank, I need to understand what my grandfather really intended with this trust, and I need to know why my family never told me about it." Frank's expression shifted from warmth to something more guarded, the look of a man who'd been keeping secrets for longer than he cared to remember. He put on his reading glasses and examined the documents I'd brought, though I suspected he knew every word by heart. "Your nonno? He was a very smart man," Frank began, settling back into his chair. "He saw what happened to other family businesses, how they got destroyed by greed, or sold to outsiders who didn't understand the Romano way of building things. He wanted to make sure that could never happen to his legacy. So he left everything to me? Not everything. The business itself, that your father built with his own hands after your grandfather died. But the foundation, the land, the permits that make the business possible, yes, he left those to you. But there were conditions." Frank pulled out a thick folder from his desk drawer, one that looked like it had been waiting for this conversation for years. Inside were documents I'd never seen, correspondence between my grandfather and various lawyers, and what appeared to be detailed instructions for managing the trust. "Your grandfather specified that the trust beneficiary must demonstrate 3 things before taking control: education in business or related field, leadership experience under pressure, and unwavering commitment to family values." Frank looked at me over his glasses. "Your college degree, your military service, your Bronze Star, these were not coincidences he hoped for. These were qualifications he required." The revelation hit me like a flashbang grenade. My grandfather hadn't just left me the land. He'd essentially designed my entire life path, creating a framework that would prepare me to be worthy of the inheritance while ensuring I'd have the skills necessary to protect it. Did my father know about these requirements? Frank's silence was answer enough. Finally, he nodded slowly. "Your father has been the trust's co-executor since your grandfather's death. He has received annual reports on your progress, updates on your military service, copies of your performance evaluations. Then why would he try to push me out now, when I've met all the requirements? Because, cara mia, your father thought, he could control the trust through you. He believed that if you came home grateful and dependent, you would sign over management rights to him and Marcus while keeping the legal ownership in your name. A puppet owner, so to speak." The pieces fell into place with sickening clarity. My father hadn't been protecting me from the stress of corporate leadership. He'd been protecting himself from losing control of assets he'd never actually owned. The fake psychological evaluation wasn't just about discrediting me. It was about building a legal case for declaring me mentally incompetent to manage the trust, which would allow him to petition for permanent guardianship of the properties. "Frank, what happens if Romano Construction can't pay their lease on the trust properties?" His smile was thin and knowing. "There is no lease, Victoria. Your father has been using trust properties for 25 years without paying rent. Your grandfather allowed this arrangement because he assumed the family business would eventually pass to you anyway. But technically, Romano Construction has been operating on your land without compensation since the day you turned 25. Felt a cold satisfaction spreading through my chest, the same feeling I'd had when successfully completing a difficult mission in Afghanistan. The enemy had revealed their positions, and now I could see the entire battlefield clearly. How much would fair market rent be for those properties? Frank consulted another document in the folder. Based on current commercial real estate values in Davidson County, approximately $47,000 per month for the headquarters building alone. The equipment yard would be another $22,000. The warehouse, perhaps $15,000. The development lots. Those would depend on usage, but if they're actively generating revenue, we could be looking at percentage-based rent rather than flat fees. $84,000 per month in unpaid rent, not counting the development lots. Over $1 million per year that Romano Construction owed to the trust they'd been using without permission. No wonder my father had been so eager to get me to sign management rights over to him. There's something else, Frank continued, pulling out a sealed envelope with my name written in my grandfather's distinctive handwriting. He left this for you, to be opened only after you'd completed your military service and learned about the trust. I broke the wax seal with trembling fingers. Inside was a single sheet of paper, covered in my grandfather's careful cursive. My dearest Victoria, it began, if you are reading this, it means you have grown into the strong, capable woman I always knew you would become. It also means that someone in our family has tried to deny you what is rightfully yours. I am sorry for this, but I am not surprised. Power makes people do terrible things, even to those they love. The land I am leaving you is more than property. It is the foundation of everything our family has built, and it will be the foundation of everything you will build in the future. Use it wisely. Use it fairly. But never let anyone take it from you, no matter how much they claim to love you, or how convincing their reasons might sound. You have Romano blood, but more importantly, you have Romano strength. Trust your instincts. Trust your training. And remember that sometimes the people who try to protect you from making difficult decisions are really trying to protect themselves from the consequences of your strength. Build something worthy of the Romano name. Build something that would make your great-grandmother proud. And if anyone tries to stop you, remind them that you are Antonio Romano's granddaughter, and we have never backed down from a fight worth fighting. With all my love and faith in your future, Nono. I read the letter 3 times, feeling my grandfather's presence in every word. He'd known this day would come. He'd prepared for it, planned for it, and given me every tool I would need to handle it properly. Frank, I need you to prepare 3 documents for me. First, a formal notice to Romano Construction that they are in violation of their property usage agreement and owe substantial back rent. Second, a cease and desist order regarding any attempts to declare me mentally incompetent based on fraudulent psychological evaluations. Third, a new property management agreement that establishes fair market rates for continued use of trust properties. Frank's smile was broader now, the expression of a lawyer who'd been waiting decades to write exactly these documents. And if they refuse to sign the new agreement? Then Romano Construction will need to find new headquarters, a new equipment, yard, and new warehouse space within 30 days. And they'll need to halt all work on the Nashville development project until they can secure proper permits from the actual landowner. I stood to leave, then turned back to Frank one more time. How long have you been waiting to have this conversation? 25 years, cara mia. Your grandfather made me promise to protect his trust until you were ready to claim it. I have been watching, waiting, and preparing for this day since you were 2 years old. Walking out of Frank's office, I felt the weight of my grandfather's legacy settling on my shoulders like a familiar uniform. It was heavy, but it was mine. And unlike the family that had tried to steal it from me, it was something I'd actually earned. The drive to Romano Construction headquarters felt different knowing I owned the ground beneath the building. Every pothole in the parking lot, every crack in the concrete foundation, every square foot of the property that housed millions of dollars in equipment and inventory belonged to me. The irony wasn't lost on me that I was pulling into my own parking lot to confront the people who'd tried to steal my inheritance while using my property to do it. I'd dressed carefully that morning. My best business suit, the navy blue one I'd worn to important meetings with military contractors, paired with the pearl earrings Nona Rosa had given me for my college graduation. If my family wanted to treat this like a corporate negotiation instead of a family discussion, I'd give them the full professional experience. The receptionist, Maria Gonzalez, looked up with genuine warmth when I walked through the glass doors. She'd been with the company for 15 years, had watched me grow up during summer internships and holiday visits, had always treated me like the future owner rather than just the boss's daughter. Victoria. Congratulations on your bronze star, Mija. We're all so proud of you. Her smile faltered slightly when she saw my expression. Are you here to see your father? Actually, I'm here to see everyone. Could you ask my father, Marcus, and Nona Rosa to meet me in the main conference room? Tell them it's regarding the transition documents from last night. Maria nodded, reaching for her phone, but I caught her attention again. Maria, after today, things might be different around here. I want you to know that whatever happens, your job is secure. You've been loyal to this company for a long time, and that loyalty matters to me. The confusion in her eyes told me she had no idea what storm was about to hit Romano Construction. Neither did my family, apparently, because they all arrived in the conference room looking relaxed and confident, like they were attending a routine business meeting instead of a reckoning. My father entered first, wearing his standard uniform of pressed khakis and a Romano Construction polo shirt. Marcus followed, dressed in another expensive suit that probably cost more than most people's monthly mortgage payment. Nona Rosa brought up the rear, her silver hair perfectly styled, her posture regal as always. Victoria, my father said, settling into his usual seat at the head of the long oak table. I'm glad you called this meeting. We have a lot of paperwork to finalize, and I'd prefer to get everything settled quickly so we can all move forward. I remained standing, positioning myself at the opposite end of the table where I could see all three of them clearly. On the table in front of me, I placed 3 manila envelopes, each one labeled with a name. You're right about moving forward quickly, I said, but I think we need to clear up some misunderstandings before we finalize anything. Marcus leaned back in his chair, that familiar smirk playing at the corners of his mouth. Look, Vic, I know this is hard for you to accept, but the decision's been made. You've got your severance package, your non-compete has reasonable terms, and you'll have plenty of time to figure out what you want to do next. Actually, Marcus, I've already figured out what I want to do next. I slid the first envelope across the table to my father. That's a formal notice regarding Romano Construction's property usage violations. You'll want to review it carefully. My father opened the envelope with the casual confidence of someone who'd never been challenged in his own conference room. I watched his face change as he read Frank Castellano's carefully worded legal document, watched the color drain from his cheeks as he realized what he was looking at. This can't be right, he muttered, looking up at me with an expression I'd never seen before. You don't own these properties. The company owns these properties. The company has been using these properties, I corrected. But according to Davidson County property records and the Romano family trust documents that you've been co-executing for 25 years, I've owned them since my 25th birthday, which means Romano Construction owes the trust approximately $1,200,000 in unpaid rent. Nona Rosa's sharp intake of breath was the only sound in the room for several long seconds. Marcus looked confused, glancing between me and our father like he was waiting for someone to explain the joke he wasn't getting. Victoria, Nona Rosa said carefully, your grandfather's trust was a complicated legal arrangement. Just because your name is on some documents doesn't mean you understand the full implications of ownership. I slid the second envelope to her. That's a cease and desist order regarding any attempts to have me declared mentally incompetent based on the fraudulent psychological evaluation you paid Dr. Richard Brennan to produce. Frank Castellano has already contacted Dr. Brennan's office. He's very interested in discussing how someone can conduct a thorough psychological assessment without ever meeting the patient. The silence in the room shifted from confused to dangerous. My father's hands were flat on the table, his knuckles white with tension. Marcus had stopped smirking entirely, his expensive suit suddenly looking less like armor and more like a costume. "You hired a psychiatrist to evaluate me without my knowledge or consent," I continued, my voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through my system. "You created medical documentation claiming I was mentally unfit for corporate leadership. You presented this fraudulent evaluation as justification for denying me my rightful position in the family business. In legal terms, that's called conspiracy to commit fraud." "Now wait just a minute," my father said, standing up so quickly his chair rolled backward. "We were protecting you. After everything you've been through overseas, we thought it would be better if you had time to adjust before taking on major responsibilities." Protecting me from what? From succeeding? From proving that your golden son isn't capable of running a construction company? I looked directly at Marcus. "Speaking of which, how did that situation with the Memphis permits work out? The one where you forgot to file the environmental impact assessment and cost us 6 weeks of delays?" Marcus's face flushed red. "That was a paperwork error. It happens. It happened 3 times in 6 months, along with the electrical contractor you hired without checking their license status, which resulted in a $50,000 fine from the state regulatory board, and the concrete supplier you chose based on the lowest bid, whose substandard materials had to be completely replaced during the Johnson project. I'd done my homework the night before, calling contacts in the industry who were happy to share information about Romano Construction's recent struggles. Word traveled fast in Nashville's construction community, and Marcus's mistakes had been noticed by everyone except our family. "Those were learning experiences," my father said defensively. "Every executive makes mistakes when they're starting out." "You're right," I agreed. "The difference is that I made my mistakes leading soldiers through combat zones where the consequences were measured in lives, not just money. Marcus made his mistakes sitting in climate-controlled offices where his biggest challenge was choosing the right catered lunch for board meetings." I slid the third envelope to Marcus. "That's your copy of the new property management agreement for Romano Construction's continued use of trust properties. The rent is set at fair market rates, payable monthly, with a 60-day grace period for bringing your account current." Marcus opened his envelope with shaking hands. "These numbers. We can't afford these rates. This would bankrupt the company." "Then, maybe you should have thought about that before you tried to steal the company from the person who actually owns the land it sits on." I gathered my purse and turned toward the door. "You have 72 hours to decide whether you want to sign the new agreement or find alternative facilities for your operations." "Victoria, please," Nonna Rosa said, her voice carrying a note of desperation I'd never heard before. "We're family. We can work this out. There has to be a compromise." I stopped at the door but didn't turn around. "You stopped being my family the moment you decided to lie about my mental health and steal my inheritance. Frank Castellano will be handling all future communications regarding the trust properties. If you want to discuss anything else, you can reach me through my attorney." "Your attorney?" my father asked. "Victoria, you're being dramatic. This is still a family business." "No," I said, finally turning to face them one last time. "This is my business now, and unlike you, I actually earned it." Walking out of that conference room, I felt the same sense of completion I'd experienced after difficult missions in Afghanistan. The objective had been accomplished, the enemy's positions had been neutralized, and now it was time to move forward with the next phase of operations. Behind me, I could hear raised voices beginning what would undoubtedly be the first of many heated family discussions about their new reality. But those conversations would happen without me, because I was done being a Romano who begged for acceptance. Now I was a Romano who owned the ground they stood on. The calls started 3 hours after I left the conference room. First my father, then Marcus, then Nonna Rosa, each leaving increasingly desperate voicemails that I deleted without listening to completely. By evening, my phone was buzzing so constantly that I finally turned it off and sat in my apartment with a cup of coffee and Frank Castellanos' legal files, planning my next moves like a military operation requiring careful coordination and flawless execution. The knock on my door came at 9:30, soft but persistent. Through the peephole, I saw Marcus standing in the hallway, his expensive suit wrinkled, his usually perfect hair disheveled. He looked like a man who'd spent the afternoon discovering that his entire future had been built on someone else's foundation. I opened the door, but didn't invite him in. "If you're here to negotiate, you need to go through Frank Castellano." "Here to talk to my sister," Marcus said, his voice carrying none of its usual confidence. "Please, Vic. Just 5 minutes." Against my better judgment, I stepped aside and let him enter. He walked into my living room like he was visiting a foreign country, taking in the sparse furniture and military awards with eyes that seemed to be seeing me clearly for the first time in years. "I didn't know," he said finally, settling onto my couch without being invited. "About the trust, about Nono's will, about any of it. Dad told me the company was mine because I was the one who stayed home and learned the business while you were playing soldier." Playing soldier. Even in what appeared to be an attempt at reconciliation, Marcus couldn't resist diminishing my military service. But something in his voice suggested the comment was more habit than malice, like he was repeating words he'd heard so often they'd become his default language for discussing my choices. "What did you think was going to happen when I came home?" I asked, remaining standing near the door. "Did you really believe I'd spent 8 years in the Army just to come back and work as your employee?" Marcus ran his hands through his hair, a gesture I remembered from childhood when he was struggling with homework that came easily to me. "Dad said you'd probably want to start your own consulting business, maybe work with military contractors or security companies. He said the construction industry was too rough for someone who'd been through what you'd been through overseas." "And you believed him?" I wanted to believe him. Marcus looked up at me with an expression that reminded me uncomfortably of the brother who used to come to my room when he was scared of thunderstorms. "Do you know what it's like being the twin who's always been second best at everything? You got better grades. You were Dad's favorite. You were the one Nono talked about when he told stories about the future of the company." The admission hung in the air between us like smoke from an explosion. For the first time since yesterday's ambush in the conference room, I saw something genuine in my brother's face instead of the practiced indifference he'd worn like armor. "So you decided to take what you couldn't earn?" "I decided to stop competing with someone who was never going to lose." Marcus's voice cracked slightly. "When you joined the Army, it was the first time in my life that I got to be the Romano twin who stayed home, who learned from Dad, who got praised for understanding the business. For 8 years, I got to be the son he was proud of instead of the son he tolerated because he loved my sister more." The words hit harder than I'd expected. Growing up, I'd never realized that my relationship with our father had affected Marcus so deeply. I'd been focused on earning approval and building my future, never considering that my success might feel like his failure. "That doesn't excuse what you did," I said. "It doesn't excuse the lies, the fake psychological evaluation, the attempt to steal my inheritance." "You're right, it doesn't." Marcus stood up, straightening his wrinkled suit jacket. "But I need you to know that I didn't plan any of that. Dad and Nona Rosa handled the legal stuff. They told me you were having trouble adjusting to civilian life, that you needed time to heal before taking on major responsibilities. I thought we were protecting you." "From what?" "From failing." The words came out in a rush, like he'd been holding them back for hours. "Dad kept saying that you'd been trained for military operations, not business operations. That the skills didn't transfer. That you'd make mistakes that could destroy everything Nono built. He said it would be kinder to let you think the decision was about your mental health than to let you try and fail publicly." I felt a cold rage building in my chest, different from the calculated anger I'd felt during this morning's confrontation. This was personal betrayal on a level I'd never imagined possible. So instead of giving me a chance to prove myself, you decided to prove I was incompetent without even testing me? We thought we were being realistic. Marcus's voice was barely above a whisper. The construction industry in Nashville is brutal, Vic. The profit margins are razor thin, the competition is vicious, and one major mistake can bankrupt a company overnight. We thought civilian business would be too different from military operations. Marcus, do you know what I did in Afghanistan? Really, no. Not just the sanitized version Dad shared at family dinners. He shook his head. I managed construction. Projects. Schools, medical clinics, infrastructure repairs. I coordinated with local contractors who spoke 3 different languages, navigated government bureaucracy that made Nashville's permit process look simple, and solved logistical problems while people were literally shooting at me. I supervised projects where mistakes meant people died, where delays meant entire communities went without clean water or medical care. Marcus stared at me like I was speaking a foreign language. I've negotiated with suppliers who demanded payments in multiple currencies, managed construction schedules that had to work around combat operations, and completed projects on time and under budget while living in a war zone. But somehow, you thought managing a construction company in Tennessee would be too challenging for me. When you put it like that, it sounds... Marcus trailed off, apparently realizing how ridiculous their reasoning had been. It sounds like you never bothered to ask what I actually did overseas. You just assumed that military service was irrelevant to civilian business, despite the fact that half the construction industry is made up of veterans who learned their skills in the military. Marcus walked to my window and looked out at the Nashville skyline, his reflection ghost-like in the glass. What happens now, Vic? Do you destroy the company out of spite? Do you bankrupt us and start over with your own business? I haven't decided yet. The honesty surprised even me. Yesterday, I thought I was coming home to join the family business. Today, I own the family business, or at least the foundation. It's built on. Tomorrow, I'll figure out what that means. Could you forgive us? Eventually? I considered the question seriously, thinking about the grandfather I'd never really known, but whose trust had protected my future. Thinking about the family that had raised me to believe in loyalty and hard work, while planning to deny me the rewards of both. I might be able to forgive you, Marcus. You were manipulated by people you trusted, and you believed lies that were designed to sound like protection. But Dad and Nana Rosa? They spent months planning this betrayal. They paid money to create false medical documentation. They violated every principle Nono built this company on. Marcus nodded slowly, like he'd expected that answer. For what it's worth, I think you'd be a better CEO than me. I've made mistakes that you never would have made, and I've been learning on the job while you were leading people through life and death situations. Why are you telling me this? Because I'm tired of pretending to be something I'm not. Marcus turned back to face me. I'm good at project management, Vic. I'm good at client relations and vendor negotiations. But I'm not a leader, and I'm not a visionary. I'm the guy who implements other people's ideas, and there's nothing wrong with that except when people expect you to be the guy who creates the ideas. The admission was the most honest thing Marcus had said to me in years. For a moment, I could see the brother I'd grown up with, the one who was genuinely good at supporting roles but had been pushed into leadership positions he'd never wanted and wasn't suited for. What would you do if you could choose any role in the company? I asked. Operations manager. Let someone else make the big decisions and deal with the board meetings and the long-term planning. I just want to make sure the projects get completed on time and the clients are happy. I walked him to the door, my mind racing with possibilities I hadn't considered before. Maybe this situation didn't have to end with the complete destruction of Romano Construction. Maybe there was a way to honor my grandfather's vision while acknowledging the complicated family dynamics that had led to this betrayal. Marcus, I said as he stepped into the hallway, if I decide to restructure the company instead of destroying it, Would you be willing to work under my leadership? Really work, not just pretend to cooperate while undermining my decisions? Yes, he said, without hesitation. I'd rather be a good operations manager for my sister than a bad CEO for anyone else. After he left, I sat in my quiet apartment and called Jessica Martinez. "How did the confrontation go?" she asked immediately. "Better than expected. Worse than I hoped, and more complicated than I planned for. Want to talk about it? Tomorrow. Tonight, I need to figure out whether I'm in the business of rebuilding or the business of revenge." The decision came to me at 4:30 in the morning, not through careful deliberation, but through a moment of absolute clarity that felt like receiving direct orders from a commanding officer. I was lying in bed, staring at the ceiling and thinking about my grandfather's letter, when I realized that rebuilding wasn't the opposite of revenge. Done correctly, rebuilding could be the most powerful form of justice possible. I got up, made coffee, and called Frank Castellanos' emergency number. "Victoria? Is everything all right?" "Frank, I need you to draft incorporation papers for a new company, Romano Veterans Construction. I want it established as a veteran-owned business with all the federal contracting benefits that designation provides, and I want it done today." There was a long pause. "Are you dissolving Romano Construction?" "No, I'm acquiring it. As the primary property owner, I'm going to restructure the existing company under new management while maintaining its contracts and employee base, but I want the option to operate independently if the current ownership refuses to cooperate." Frank's chuckle carried 40 years of legal experience. "Your grandfather would be very proud, cara mia. Very proud indeed." By 8 o'clock, I was dressed in my most professional attire and driving toward the Romano Construction offices, but this time I wasn't going there to confront my family. I was going there to speak with the employees who'd been caught in the middle of a family drama they'd never signed up for. Maria looked surprised to see me back so soon, especially given the tension that had apparently filled the building after yesterday's meeting. Word traveled fast in a construction company, and everyone knew something significant had happened in the main conference room. "Is everything okay, mija?" she asked quietly. "Your father seemed very upset yesterday, and Marcus has been in his office with the door closed since early this morning." "Everything's going to be fine, Maria, but I need to speak with the entire staff. Could you call a company-wide meeting for 10 o'clock? Include everyone: office staff, project managers, foremen, everyone currently on payroll." "Should I tell your father about the meeting? He'll find out soon enough." I spent the next hour reviewing employee files and project schedules, familiarizing myself with the current state of operations and the people who actually made Romano Construction function day to day. What I found was both encouraging and concerning. The company employed 47 people, many of whom had been with Romano Construction for over a decade. They were skilled, experienced, and loyal. But the financial records showed mounting debt, delayed payments to suppliers, and a cash flow problem that would become critical within 60 days, if not addressed immediately. Marcus's mistakes hadn't just been embarrassing. They'd been expensive enough to threaten the company's survival. At 10 o'clock, I stood in the main conference room facing 47 employees who'd heard rumors about family conflict, but had no idea their jobs might be in jeopardy. Project managers sat next to administrative assistants, crane operators next to accountants, all of them united by uncertainty about their futures. "Good morning, everyone. For those who don't know me well, I'm Victoria Romano. I've just completed 8 years of military service, including 2 combat deployments where I managed construction engineering projects. I've come home to find that Romano Construction is facing some significant challenges, both financial and organizational." I paused, looking around the room at faces I'd known since childhood mixed with newer employees who'd joined the company during my absence. These people had families to support, mortgages to pay, children in college. Their livelihoods depended on Romano Construction's survival, regardless of whatever family drama had created the current crisis. I want you to know that your jobs are secure. Whatever changes happen to the company's ownership or management structure, every single person in this room will have a place in Romano Construction's future, if you want it. But I also want to be honest about our situation. I pulled up a financial summary on the conference room's projection screen, numbers that painted a clear picture of the company's precarious position. We're carrying too much debt. We've lost money on recent projects due to permit delays and material cost overruns, and we need to secure new contracts quickly to maintain positive cash flow. Murmurs rippled through the room as people processed the information. These were construction professionals who understood that companies could fail, that financial mismanagement could destroy decades of hard work in a matter of months. However, I continued, Romano Construction also has significant assets and competitive advantages that we haven't been utilizing effectively. Our reputation for quality work is excellent. Our employee retention rate is outstanding. And our project portfolio includes some of the most prestigious developments in Middle Tennessee. I clicked to the next slide, showing a list of federal and state contracts that were available exclusively to veteran-owned businesses. As of yesterday, I've applied for certification as a veteran-owned business, which will make us eligible for government contracts worth millions of dollars annually. These contracts have built-in profit margins and guaranteed payment schedules that will stabilize our cash flow and provide steady work for everyone in this room. The mood in the room shifted from anxiety to cautious optimism. Several of the project managers leaned forward in their chairs, clearly recognizing the potential value of federal contracting opportunities. But securing these contracts will require changes to how we operate. We'll need to meet federal compliance standards, implement new quality control procedures, and demonstrate that we can complete projects on time and under budget consistently. No more permit delays. No more cost overruns due to poor planning. No more accepting low-bid contractors who deliver substandard materials. I looked directly at our most senior project manager, Robert Chen, a man who'd worked for Romano Construction for 18 years and knew exactly which recent problems I was referencing. Robert, based on your experience with the Johnson project delays, what would you estimate as the cost difference between proper planning and reactive problem solving? Robert cleared his throat, clearly uncomfortable being put on the spot, but honest enough to give a direct answer. Planning properly adds maybe 3% to project costs up front. Fixing problems after they occur typically costs us 15 to 20%, plus schedule delays that can trigger penalty clauses. Exactly. Which means that proper planning isn't an expense, it's an investment that pays for itself several times over. I clicked to the next slide, showing a comparison of our recent project costs versus industry standards. We've been approaching construction management like it's crisis response instead of strategic planning. That changes now. I spent the next 20 minutes outlining specific changes to project management protocols, quality control procedures, and client communication standards. These weren't revolutionary concepts, just basic business practices that had been neglected during the leadership transition confusion of the past year. I know this is a lot of information, and I know you're probably wondering about the family dynamics that led to this meeting, I said finally. Here's what you need to know. Romano Construction will continue operating under new management focused on financial stability and sustainable growth. Employee benefits will remain the same or improve. Safety standards will be enhanced, not compromised to save money. And anyone who's committed to excellence in construction work will have opportunities for advancement based on merit, not politics. A hand went up in the back of the room. Jenny Walsh, one of our newest administrative assistants, looked nervous but determined. What about the Nashville expansion project? There are rumors that it might be canceled. The Nashville expansion project will proceed as planned, but under revised management and oversight procedures. It's too important to our financial future to cancel, but it's also too important to our reputation to mismanage. I smiled at Jenny. And thank you for asking the hard question. That's exactly the kind of direct communication we need to make this company successful. As the meeting wrapped up, I could see the relief on people's faces mixing with genuine excitement about new opportunities. These were professionals who'd been worried about job security, but were now hearing about growth potential and improved working conditions. Robert Chen approached me as others were filing out of the conference room. "Victoria, I've been wondering when you were going to take over the company. Your father's a good man, but Marcus—" He shook his head diplomatically. "Let's just say that those of us who've been here for a while have been hoping you'd come home and straighten things out. How long have people been expecting this change?" "Since you left for the army, honestly. We all knew you were the one with the vision and the business sense. Marcus tries hard, but he's not cut out for leadership decisions." I realized then that my family's assessment of employee loyalty had been completely wrong. They'd assumed that longtime employees would resist my leadership because I'd been away for 8 years. Instead, those employees had been waiting for my return because they'd watched Marcus struggle with responsibilities he wasn't equipped to handle. Walking back to my office, the one that had been designated as mine since college but that I'd never actually used, I felt the weight of real responsibility settling on my shoulders. This wasn't just about proving my family wrong or claiming my inheritance. It was about the livelihoods of 47 people who'd just put their trust in my ability to lead them through a difficult transition. I'd led soldiers through combat zones, but this felt more challenging in some ways. In Afghanistan, the mission, objectives had been clear and the chain of command was unambiguous. Here, I was creating the mission objectives while establishing my own authority, all while navigating family relationships that had been poisoned by years of manipulation and betrayal. But as I sat in my office, looking out at the construction yard that I now legally owned, I felt the same sense of purpose I'd experienced during my most successful military operations. The objective was clear: transform Romano Construction into a thriving veteran-owned business while honoring my grandfather's vision and protecting the people who depended on the company for their livelihoods. The enemy positions had been identified: financial instability, poor management practices, and family members who prioritized personal comfort over professional competence. Now it was time to execute the mission. The transformation began quietly, like most successful military operations. While my family spent the weekend making frantic phone calls to lawyers and accountants, trying to find loopholes in my grandfather's trust that didn't exist, I was working 16-hour days to restructure every aspect of Romano Construction's operations. By Monday morning, federal contracting applications were submitted, new vendor agreements were negotiated, and every active project had been reassessed for compliance with the quality standards that would define our company's future. The first major test came Tuesday afternoon when Marcus walked into my office carrying a resignation letter and wearing the defeated expression of someone who'd finally accepted that his version of reality had been permanently altered. "I can't do this, Vic," he said, placing the letter on my desk without sitting down. "I can't work for my sister after spending 3 years believing I was going to inherit everything. I can't pretend to take orders from someone I was taught to see as subordinate." I read his resignation carefully, noting that it was professional, brief, and completely devoid of the bitterness I'd expected. "Where will you go?" "Henderson Construction offered me a project management position. The pay's decent, and I won't have to make executive decisions or deal with family drama." Marcus finally sat down, looking more relaxed than I'd seen him since our childhood. "Honestly, it's a relief. I've been terrified of making major mistakes for 3 years, and now I don't have to anymore." "What about Dad and Nona Rosa? Are they planning to resign too?" Marcus shook his head. "Dad's talking about fighting this legally, claiming you're emotionally unstable and unfit to manage the trust properties. Nona Rosa thinks she can manipulate you into signing management rights over to her, the way she manipulated Nono into letting her control family decisions after Nona Maria died." The revelation about my grandmother's manipulation tactics wasn't entirely surprising. but hearing it confirmed felt like discovering that my childhood memories had been carefully orchestrated, performances rather than genuine family moments. And you? Do you think I'm emotionally unstable? I think you're the most emotionally stable person in our family, Marcus said without hesitation. You always have been. Even as kids, when I'd have meltdowns over losing a board game, you'd stay calm and figure out solutions. I used to hate that about you, but now I realize it's exactly what this company needs. I signed his resignation letter and stood to shake his hand. Marcus, for what it's worth, I think Henderson Construction is lucky to get you. You're good at project management when you're not being pressured to be something you're not. Thanks, Vic. And for what it's worth, I hope you succeed beyond everyone's expectations. This company deserves leadership that actually cares about building things instead of just owning things. After Marcus left, I called Jessica Martinez and asked her to meet me at the construction site for the Nashville expansion project. If Romano Construction was going to survive and thrive under my leadership, this project had to be completed flawlessly, on schedule, and profitably enough to demonstrate that veteran-owned businesses could outperform traditional contractors. The FI site was a mess. Equipment sat idle because permits hadn't been properly coordinated. Foundation work had been delayed because soil samples hadn't been tested according to environmental regulations. The project timeline showed a completion date that was already 6 weeks behind schedule, with penalty clauses that would cost Romano Construction over $200,000 if not resolved quickly. This is what happens when you put someone in charge who doesn't understand the difference between managing and leading, Jessica said, surveying the chaotic scene. How long do you have to fix this? According to the contract, 8 weeks to substantial completion. According to our cash flow projections, 6 weeks before we start missing payroll if we don't collect the performance bonuses. Jessica whistled. Oh, that's cutting it close even for someone with your project management experience. I pulled out the revised project schedule I'd developed over the weekend, cross-referencing it with the federal compliance standards we'd need to meet for veteran-owned business certification. It's aggressive, but achievable if we eliminate inefficiencies and stop making the same mistakes repeatedly. The next morning, I called another company-wide meeting, this time including the subcontractors and suppliers who'd been dealing with Romano Construction's inconsistent management for the past year. The conference room was packed with everyone, from concrete truck drivers to electrical engineers, all of whom had heard rumors about ownership changes, but weren't sure what it meant for their working relationships. Good morning, everyone. I'm Victoria Romano, and as of this week, I'm the primary owner and CEO of Romano Construction. I've asked you all here because we need to discuss some significant changes to how we operate, and I want everyone to understand exactly what those changes mean. I clicked to the first slide of my presentation, showing before and after comparisons of project timelines and cost overruns. For the past year, this company has been operating at a loss due to poor planning, inadequate quality control, and inconsistent communication with contractors and suppliers. That ends today. Murmurs rippled through the room as people recognized their own projects in the examples I was showing. Several subcontractors nodded approvingly, apparently relieved that someone was finally acknowledging the systemic problems they'd been dealing with. Starting immediately, we're implementing new standards for project planning, materials procurement, and contractor coordination. These standards are based on federal contracting requirements, which means they're more demanding than what you're used to, but they're also more consistent and more fairly compensated. I spent 30 minutes outlining specific changes, mandatory pre-project meetings with all subcontractors, standardized quality checkpoints, automated progress reporting, and performance bonuses tied to schedule adherence and safety compliance. These weren't punitive measures designed to make people's jobs harder. They were professional standards designed to make everyone's work more predictable and more profitable. I know some of you have had frustrating experiences with Romano Construction recently, I said, looking directly at Mike Peterson, the electrical contractor who'd been waiting 3 months for payment on completed work. That's unacceptable. and it's going to change. Mike, you'll receive full payment on your outstanding invoices by Friday, along with a bonus payment for the delays you've endured. Mike's eyebrows shot up. Seriously? Seriously. We can't build successful projects with contractors who don't trust us to pay them fairly and promptly. And we can't expect quality work from people who think we don't value their contributions. I clicked to the next slide, showing the federal contracts Romano Construction would be eligible for once our veteran-owned certification was approved. The numbers were impressive enough to capture everyone's attention. School renovations, infrastructure repairs, military housing projects, all with built-in profit margins and guaranteed payment schedules. These contracts will provide steady work for everyone in this room for the next 5 years, but only if we can demonstrate consistent quality and reliability. Which brings me to the Nashville expansion project. I outlined my plan for recovering the lost time and avoiding the penalty clauses, including overtime shifts, parallel work streams, and performance incentives that would actually reward people for exceptional effort rather than just expecting it. Tom Richardson, I called out to our most experienced foreman. Based on what you've seen of this project so far, do you think this timeline is realistic? Tom had been with Romano Construction for 12 years and had developed a reputation for brutal honesty about project feasibility. It's tight, Victoria, but it's doable if we stop wasting time on bureaucratic nonsense and focus on actual construction work. The guys have been frustrated because we keep having to redo things that should have been done right the first time. Exactly. And that's going to change because we're going to plan thoroughly before we start work, rather than trying to plan while we're working. Over the next hour, I fielded questions about everything from safety protocols to vacation scheduling, making it clear that Romano Construction under my leadership would prioritize both professional excellence and employee welfare. These weren't contradictory goals. Companies that took care of their people consistently outperformed companies that viewed employees as expendable resources. As the meeting wrapped up, I noticed something I hadn't expected: genuine enthusiasm from people who'd been going through the motions for months. These were professionals who took pride in their work but had been frustrated by management decisions that made quality construction unnecessarily difficult. Robert Chen approached me as others were filing out. Victoria, I've been in this industry for 22 years, and I've never seen anyone implement this kind of comprehensive change this quickly. Are you sure you can maintain this pace? Robert, I've managed construction projects while people were shooting at me. Compared to that, dealing with permit offices and material suppliers feels like vacation time. He laughed, the first genuine laugh I'd heard in the Romano Construction offices since returning from deployment. In that case, I think we're going to be just fine. That afternoon, my father finally made his appearance, walking into my office without knocking and settling into the chair across from my desk, like he still owned everything in the room. Victoria, we need to discuss the future of this company. You're making changes too quickly, alienating people who've been loyal to Romano Construction for decades. I looked up from the federal contracting applications I was reviewing, noting that my father's confidence seemed forced rather than natural. Which people exactly? Because I just spent 2 hours in meetings with employees and contractors, and they seem pretty enthusiastic about the changes. You're being naive, sweetheart. Running a construction company isn't like running a military unit. These people need stability, not constant upheaval. Dad, respectfully, you've been running this company for 25 years, and it's currently 3 months away from bankruptcy. I've been running it for 3 days, and we've already secured enough new contracts to cover payroll for the next 6 months. Which approach do you think provides more stability for our employees? The conversation that followed would determine whether Romano Construction moved forward as a united family business or as a veteran-owned enterprise that happened to employ some members of the Romano family in subordinate roles. My father's face cycled through emotions I'd never seen before: disbelief, anger, and finally something that looked like fear. He gripped the arms of his chair so tightly his knuckles went white. the same way his hands had looked when he'd announced Marcus would be taking over the company just 4 days earlier. "You can't just waltz in here and destroy everything I've built," he said, his voice rising to a level that would carry through the thin office walls to where employees were trying to work. "This company has my name on it, my sweat in every foundation, my reputation tied to every project. Your name, yes. Your sweat, absolutely. But your ownership?" I pulled out the trust documents Frank Castellano had prepared, spreading them across my desk like evidence in a court case. "The land belongs to me, Dad. The permits are issued to my trust. The equipment storage leases are in my name. You've been operating Romano Construction as a tenant, not an owner." He stared at the documents like they were written in a foreign language, though I knew he'd been co-executing the trust for 25 years and understood every clause better than almost anyone. "Your grandfather never intended for you to use this trust to destroy the family business. You're right. He intended for me to use it to protect the family business from being destroyed." I leaned back in my chair, feeling the weight of 3 generations of Romano legacy settling on my shoulders. "Tell me something, Dad. When you paid Dr. Brennan to write that psychological evaluation, when you coordinated with Nonna Rosa to have me declared mentally unfit, when you planned to steal my inheritance while I was serving my country overseas, did any of that feel like protecting the family business?" The silence stretched between us like a chasm that couldn't be bridged with explanations or apologies. Through my office window, I could see construction crews working on the Nashville expansion project, moving with the focused efficiency that came from clear leadership and consistent expectations. "I want 51% ownership of Romano Construction transferred to the trust within 30 days, I said finally. "You can retain a minority stake and continue drawing a salary as a senior advisor, but all major decisions will go through me. Marcus can keep his operations management role if he wants it, though he's already accepted a position with Henderson Construction, and Nonna Rosa can maintain her emeritus board position, but without voting rights or management authority." My father stood up slowly, his movements carrying the careful deliberation of someone who'd just realized the ground had shifted permanently beneath his feet. "And if I refuse? Then Romano Construction ceases to exist in 30 days when I terminate the property leases and withdraw the permits that are issued to my trust. You'll be welcome to start a new company under a different name, but you'll be doing it without the Romano legacy, without the established client relationships, and without the federal contracting opportunities that come with veteran-owned business certification." He walked to my office door, then turned back one final time. "You know, Victoria, your grandfather would be ashamed of what you're doing to this family." "No, Dad. He'd be ashamed of what you tried to do to me." After he left, I sat in the quiet office and called Frank Castellano to begin the formal ownership transfer process. Then I called the Department of Veterans Affairs to confirm my business certification status. Finally, I called Jessica Martinez with an update that felt like reporting mission completion to a commanding officer. "How did he take it?" she asked. "About as well as you'd expect someone to take losing control of everything they thought they owned. Any regrets?" I looked out my window at the Romano Construction sign, the same logo I'd been drawing in my school notebooks since elementary school, the same company name I'd planned to honor through decades of excellent work and ethical business practices. None whatsoever. 6 months later, I stood in the same conference room where my family had tried to destroy my future, but now the room buzzed with the energy of a company that had remembered how to win. The Nashville expansion project had been completed 2 weeks ahead of schedule, earning Romano Construction a performance bonus that covered our outstanding debts and funded equipment upgrades. The federal contracting certification had opened doors to military housing renovations, VA hospital improvements, and infrastructure projects that provided steady revenue streams with built-in profit margins. The Bronze Star still sat on my desk, but now it was surrounded by industry awards, client appreciation letters, and photographs from project completion ceremonies where government officials praised Romano Construction's efficiency and attention to detail. Everything my grandfather had envisioned for his company's future was finally happening, just not in the way my family had expected. Marcus had stopped by that morning to deliver the final paperwork from his transition to Henderson Construction. He looked genuinely happy for the first time since we were children, comfortable in a role that utilized his strengths without demanding capabilities he'd never possessed. "You know, Vic," he'd said, "I used to resent you for being better at everything. Now I'm grateful that you were, because it means Romano Construction survived my mistakes and became something better than I could have made it." My father had signed the ownership transfer documents 3 weeks earlier, after his lawyer explained that fighting the trust provisions would be both expensive and futile. He now worked as a senior project consultant, focusing on client relationships and mentoring younger project managers. The arrangement allowed him to contribute his decades of experience without making strategic decisions that affected the company's future. Nonna Rosa had been the most difficult to manage, initially refusing to accept her reduced role and attempting to undermine my authority through gossip and manipulation. But when longtime employees and clients began praising the company's new direction, even she couldn't argue with success. She still attended board meetings, but now she listened more than she spoke. The real validation came from sources my family had never anticipated. Colonel Morrison, who'd presided over my Bronze Star ceremony, visited the construction site during a routine inspection of military contractor facilities. After touring our operations and reviewing our safety protocols, he'd pulled me aside with the kind of approval that couldn't be bought or manipulated. "Romano," he'd said, "this is exactly the kind of veteran-owned business the military needs to partner with. You've taken everything we taught you about leadership and applied it to building something that serves both your community and your country." That afternoon, as I reviewed proposals for a new VA medical center renovation that would employ 40 people for 18 months, my phone rang with a call I'd been expecting but dreading. "Victoria, it's Dr. Brennan. I think we need to talk." The conversation that followed confirmed what I'd suspected. My family had paid him $15,000 to produce a psychological evaluation based on fabricated information and leading questions designed to support predetermined conclusions. He was calling because his medical license was under review, and he wanted to cooperate with investigators rather than face criminal fraud charges. "I want you to know that I've reviewed your actual military service records," he said, his voice carrying the weight of professional shame. "Your psychological profile indicates exceptional mental health, outstanding leadership capabilities, and superior stress management skills. I should never have agreed to write an assessment without examining you personally." I accepted his apology and agreed to provide testimony for his licensing board review. But the real satisfaction came from knowing that the truth about my family's conspiracy would become part of the official record. Future generations of Romanos would understand exactly how their inheritance had been protected and why certain family members could never be trusted with leadership responsibilities. That evening, I drove past the house where I'd grown up, the one where my father still lived alone since my mother had moved to Florida after the family business transition. The lights were on in his home office, probably reviewing project proposals that now required my approval before proceeding. I didn't stop, didn't feel the need to gloat or demand additional apologies. Romano Construction was thriving under veteran leadership, employing more people than ever before, and building projects that would serve communities for generations. My grandfather's trust had accomplished exactly what he'd intended, ensuring that his legacy remained in the hands of someone who'd earned the right to carry it forward. Sometimes justice doesn't look like punishment or revenge. Sometimes it looks like taking something broken and building it into something stronger than it ever could have been under the people who tried to steal it from you. The girl who'd dreamed of building a whole city was finally getting her chance, one federal contract at a time. 2 years after that night when my sister clapped and my world shattered, I received an invitation that would have seemed impossible back then. The Nashville Business Journal wanted to feature Romano Veterans Construction as their veteran-owned business of the year. highlighting our transformation from a struggling family company to a federal contracting powerhouse worth $12 million annually. The photo shoot took place at our newest project site, a veterans housing complex that would provide homes for 100 military families. As I stood in my hard hat and safety vest, surrounded by the diverse team of veterans and civilians who'd helped build this empire, I thought about the envelope my family had handed me that terrible night. The one designed to make me disappear, quietly. Instead, I'd used every tool they'd tried to take from me. My military training, my business education, my grandfather's trust, and most importantly, my refusal to accept their version of who I was supposed to be. Marcus stopped by the photo shoot, now a successful project manager at Henderson Construction and genuinely proud of what I'd accomplished. "Remember when Dad said the construction industry was too rough for someone who'd been through what you'd been through overseas?" he asked, watching our crews work with military precision. "I remember." I smiled, adjusting my Bronze Star pin on my safety vest. Turns out he was half right. The construction industry wasn't ready for someone who'd been through what I'd been through overseas. My phone buzzed with a text from Jessica Martinez, now my business partner and head of veteran recruitment. "Channel 4 wants to interview you about the expansion into 3 more states. Ready to go national?" I was more than ready. If this story inspired you to never let anyone define your limits, subscribe to our channel for more stories about people who refused to stay down when life tried to break them. Your comeback story might be next.